Sindel Sigasan. My name is Sindel Thomas Kozar. I'm a neurodivergent two-spirit artist, advocate, and community builder from Treaty 6 territory in Saskatchewan. I'm a band member of Wenero First Nation, and as someone who was raised by residential school survivors, the work of the Gord Downie and Cheney Wenjack Fund is not abstract for me. It is personal, intergenerational, and rooted in responsibility. I'm joining you today as Youth Ambassador for the Gord Downie and Cheney Wenjack Fund, and it's truly an honor to open this space for you all. To begin, I want to recognize that we are gathering in an online space. Because we are virtual, we are likely joining from communities all across Turtle Island and maybe beyond. I invite each one of you to take a moment to reflect on the land you are on, whose territory you're a guest on, what treaty governs that land if one exists, and what responsibilities come from being there. The Gord Downie and Cheney Wenjack Fund, or DWF, operates programs throughout Canada and what Indigenous peoples call Turtle Island. The DWF main office is located in what is now called Toronto, on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Wendat peoples, and is now home to many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. We acknowledge that this area is covered by Treaty 13, signed with the Mississaugas of the Credit, and is located within Dish with One Spoon Treaty territory, and as such, we commit to honoring the spirit and responsibilities that are outlined in those agreements as we do our work. DWF employees are also located throughout Canada on different treaty and unceded territories. We recognized and are privileged to have connections to various Indigenous lands and the communities that live on and care for them. For myself, being from Treaty 6 territory, I understand treaty not as a historical document, but as an ongoing relationship. As someone who carries both Indigenous and settler ancestry, I feel responsibility to hold a place for truth, for learning, and for action. The work of reconciliation and relationship building does not happen in one office or in one territory. It happens wherever we show up with intention. So thank you all for being here today. Hi.
It's an honor to be here today for a special DWF Live with Rachael Hunt, the founder and CEO of Freedom School Co. Rachael is a keynote speaker, Indigenous employee empowerment consultant, and mentor. She is the host of the Cycle Breakers podcast, where she leads conversations on Indigenous success and well-being. Rachael, before we begin, I would love to invite you to introduce yourself in your own words and share a little bit to our audience.
Yeah, well, miigwech, thank you so much for having me today. Kina Koi Nadijnakas, Nayashinaming Indujaba, Migizian Dodam, and Ishnabe Koi Ninda. So yes, my name is Rachael. I'm a member of the Chippewas of Nawash First Nations based here in Ontario. I currently reside in Toronto, and a large part of my work is focused on Indigenous empowerment and Indigenous sovereignty, and helping folks to, walk in two worlds, both personally and professionally. And I'm really excited to, explore this conversation today and see where it goes.
Rachael, it's great to have you, and thank you again for being here today. Your work speaks deeply to the realities of intergenerational trauma and the courage it takes behind healing. We are really grateful to hold this space with you. You've spoken a lot about your decolonization journey. Could you share what that journey looked like to you and how ultimately it led you to create Freedom School Co. and the Cycle Breakers movement?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And it's been an interesting journey. And I think like most folks who are either reconnecting like I am or are just considering, how to move forward in life in a good way. And so for me, my decolonization journey didn't start with that awareness. It began in 2022 when I was living in Tulum, Mexico, actually. And while I was there, I had this identity crisis, I'll call it, where the business that I had built, so for context, Freedom School was established in 2019. And the business I had built was focused on women's empowerment. And it suddenly felt very disconnected. I felt like it wasn't aligned with who I was becoming. And I didn't know who I was becoming. It was a very confusing time. And so while I was living in Tulum, I was in a breathwork ceremony in the middle of the Mayan jungle one evening. And towards the end of that ceremony, these beautiful drums started playing. And there was something that awakened within my heart and my spirit. And it brought me back to, my younger self, attending powwows in my home community, and, something even deeper than that, right? Something within my blood memory for sure. And while I was having this visceral experience, my body was really feeling the energy of these drums. I also heard this message, and I can only explain it as creator calling me home. And while I was still living in Mexico, I knew that I needed to be back on the land, that I needed to go back to Ontario and start connecting. And so that's what I did. A few months later, I began spending as much time as I could in my home community, sitting around the kitchen table with my great auntie Norma, and going through family photo albums and just learning about the family tree, and then connecting to other cousins, and starting to attend ceremony and just learning our original ways and really understanding how much had been colonized within my life, the way I was taught, the way I was brought up, the way I was building my business. And so suddenly that confusion of why am I no longer connected to this business started to make sense, because it was the beginning, the rumblings of what became my decolonization journey, where I started to reconsider the way I was showing up in the world, the way I was leading. I started to learn our 7 sacred teachings. As an Anishinaabe woman, I was really applying as much as I could to my life and my business. And so everything started to pivot and shift. And so while Freedom School was already established, it took a total 180 pivot. And as I began to pivot that and focus my work more on Indigenous women, working with Indigenous initiatives, communities, employee resource groups, it then became apparent that, what I was building was beyond just a business. It was a movement. And I started coining it the Cycle Breakers movement. And that is, I guess, the umbrella of everything that I do today, whether it's my podcast, whether it's even an opportunity like this, or it's, facilitating a workshop or leading or delivering a keynote or mentoring. All of that is the Cycle Breakers movement. And I feel everyone who gets, to be in connection with me is also a part of that. So I know that was a bit long-winded, but for context, that is what led me to build the movement that I've created today.
Thank you so much for sharing. You used the term cycle breaker. You just mentioned it. And I just want to know, in your own words, what does it mean to break a cycle, especially when those patterns have existed across generations?
I get asked variations of this question quite a bit, or the conversation comes up quite a bit, because, I do use it a lot, and it will look different for everyone. I think if we were to simplify it, breaking the cycle comes down to a choice. It comes down to a decision that we each get to make. And that decision could be to not accept that's just the way it's always been, right? Because a lot of these generational patterns and cycles have just continued to be adopted and adapted generation after generation and brushed off as, well, it's just the way it's always been. And so I think in claiming your role as a cycle breaker, because we all have the choice, we all have the capability to break a cycle. And in fact, most of us are breaking cycles every day or in different times of our life without maybe even knowing. But it comes down to a choice of perhaps choosing a different career path, or, building a business, or going to school, completing high school, completing college or university, being the first to, I don't know, there's so many examples that I could go on, whether it's career focused or financially focused or relationship focused or personal well-being focused. It comes down to a choice. And so when we talk about intergenerational trauma, which I think most of us have to varying degrees, it really is about interrupting that cycle, interrupting that pattern. And instead of, just accepting the status quo and accepting, what's historically happened within the lineage, is you get to say, hey, that doesn't feel good. I want to try something a little different. And yeah, that choice is what it takes to break a cycle. And then of course, what happens after that is going to look different for everyone as well. It could be going into, different healing modalities, working with different therapists or practitioners or healers, or even just going inward and doing that introspective work. It all counts. It all contributes to becoming a cycle breaker. So there really is no one singular way, but yeah, I think it comes down to a choice.
And you mentioned the term intergenerational trauma as well. And just for our audience who may not be familiar with that term, could you further define it for us?
I think just to simplify it, intergenerational trauma is passed down one generation after the other. So it could be passed from, parent to children, from your grandparents, your great grandparents. And so what happens is, there's an experience that maybe a great grandfather or a great grandmother experienced. And until someone breaks that cycle and, does that repair work, that cycle can be passed down. And there is so much science to back that it can be passed down through our DNA, through our blood memory, through epigenetics. And I'm not going to get too scientific about that because I'm not an expert in that, but there are tons of studies and research out there to support that information. But essentially is we will continue to carry on what has not yet been healed, processed, and reconciled with generation after generation until there's someone who stands up and it doesn't have to be a grand announcement, but just starts to question and be like, you know what, I don't want my children to go through that same experience. It ends with me. And so an example could be that for me, my grandfather was a residential school survivor, and so I've carried in this lifetime for myself a fear of being seen and taking up space. And when I think about, the impacts and the implications of colonization and residential schools within my family lineage and how it wasn't safe to be, expressed in our culture, to be, safe in our identity as Indigenous folks, I understand that correlation. I understand that direct connection of why I have had experiences of being seen, of fearing judgment, and a lot of what we are experiencing in our day-to-day lives that we could perceive as a limitation or something holding us back can be linked back to something that happened within the lineage in a past generation. So it could be a parent, it could be a grandparent, it could be a great grandparent. And so understanding that a lot of what we are experiencing today is not ours. It's been passed through the lineage. And I think that can give us this sense of hope that, number one, that we don't need to carry it any longer. So making that decision, going back to that choice, like, I don't want to carry this anymore. Like, this isn't serving me. And then knowing that when you make that decision as well, you're not just healing for yourself, but you actually get to heal for the lineage. And you also get to heal for the legacy. So, the past 7 generations and the next 7 generations. And it doesn't have to be so deep. It doesn't have to be big and dramatic and heavy. Like, a lot of the time, it's a simple choice we make. And then we just hold ourselves accountable to continuing to commit to that choice. So I hope that was helpful.
Yes, definitely helpful, because I was just going to ask you about the nervous system's role and trauma, being carried in our bodies. So I think you really touched on that. But just to expand on why regulating our nervous system is such a key part of the healing process, could you share a little bit about that?
This is a part of my work that I have become incredibly passionate about in the past couple years, because as I've been on my own healing journey, my own cycle breaking journey for a number of years, I felt like I kind of kept going in circles in some ways over certain patterns. I couldn't understand why, no matter how much spiritual work or how much personal development, personal growth work I had done, there were certain patterns and cycles that kept repeating themselves. And so I found myself actually working with a therapist who specialized in somatic modalities, so body-based healing techniques. And in experiencing that firsthand, I was blown away by how much further I went into my own healing journey and like that repairing and that reconciliation, like internal reconciliation work, in only a matter of months. And that's when I started going down these rabbit holes and then became a certified somatic therapist or practitioner myself, is understanding that we're not even consciously able to comprehend everything that's been stored in the body. And where it comes to other forms of, traditional talk therapy, they can be incredibly valuable and helpful to help us to understand and to kind of sort through what's going on in our mind and what we're feeling. But the thing with body-based healing and working with the nervous system is that we don't really actually have to know or recall a certain memory or have to like relive or rehash the past. All we need to do is start to pay attention to the body, to listen to, notice the body's subtle cues, right? It could be something like, a pain in the shoulder, or, these stomach aches that keep coming back, or maybe you get this sharpness or this tightness in your chest. And so what is happening is your body is communicating to you. And this communication is an imprint of a memory, of an experience, of a trauma, of a wound. And it's not all trauma, it's not all wounding, but it's still living in the body. And why that is because often when we experience a trauma, and there's a whole spectrum of what trauma could look like and what that means. But what happens when the traumatic event occurs is that our system goes into, protective mode, right? It is trying to keep us safe, and it is, trying to help us survive. And so it puts up these walls and these boundaries, let's say. And there's a cycle that needs to be completed in order for us to, okay, there's a threat or our body is under stress, and okay, the stress has subsided, the threat has subsided, and then we can, come back into like homeostasis, like we can come back to our baseline. But what happens with humans, especially in wildlife and animals, they will fully complete that cycle. But with humans, the stress response cycle often doesn't get to complete because of the development of our prefrontal cortex. And again, I'm not going to get too scientific, but simplified is, for most of us humans, most of us with trauma, which is, I would say, all of us to varying degrees, is it still lives in our body because it didn't have the opportunity to fully complete the cycle that needed to happen to discharge. So what we're able to do with nervous system regulation work and somatic healing work is to go back and tune into the body, because that tightness in your chest, or that, stomach ache that you get, or the pain in your shoulder, all of that is trying to get your attention, to be like, hey, right, this is a dis-ease in the body that we need to tend to. And when we start to just listen to the body and allow it to process on its own, because the body has its own network of intelligence that we're not even aware of how powerful it is, and it will allow itself to like reset. But we've got to create that space, and to work with tools that create that safety first and foremost, and then allow that cycle to complete. And so that's why I love this work, is because I don't need you to tell me what happened. I don't need you to even remember what happened, but we just need to listen to what the body is communicating and just noticing. And often just by noticing alone, the cycle completes itself. And we start to have greater liberation, greater confidence, greater self-esteem, greater self-trust. And it can have so many positive impacts on our life. So yeah, again, I know there's so much more I could share about that, but I hope that gives a very high level, simplified look on why this work is so important. And I'm happy to go deeper or clarify if you're interested.
In those moments of anxiety, or maybe when someone feels like their body is out of control and reacting, could you share a grounding exercise that people could use?
I think anxiety is a great example. So many of us are experiencing anxiety. We're living in a world where a lot is happening. And I think we're also just so inundated by so much. Like, we're not meant to hold all of this information and to be this like accessible and to have access to the level we do. But I mean, this is also the modern world we live in. So because that is the reality, it is really important. And I think this is why it's increasingly, the conversation is becoming increasingly more prevalent, is because like we really do need to ground ourselves more than ever and come back to a lot of our original ways. Like our ancestors knew how to move the body and to sing and to dance, and and to, grieve and process. So a tool that I love that is actually so effective for anxiety is called bilateral stimulation, or we can simplify it and call it tapping. And so what happens with bilateral stimulation, I'll just start doing a demonstration. And if you want to do this alongside me, feel free. So what's happening is that I am alternating the tapping of my hands at this point, on my alternate shoulders, but you could do it your chest, you could do your head, you could do your abdomen, your hips, your thighs, you could even tap your feet. And so you can intuitively listen to what your body is telling you, where it's leading you, where it's guiding you. And what this actually does is within the brain, there's a part of the brain called the amygdala. And this is our brain's fire alarm system. And so it's always scanning our environment for threats. But sometimes it gets the information wrong, where it senses a perceived threat when we are in fact safe. And so when there's a perceived threat, even if in fact we are safe, it will set off those alarm bells, and our fear and or anxiety will start to kick in. And so what bilateral stimulation does is it actually begins to tame that fight or flight response that gets kicked in. It starts to naturally tame that fear response, that threat response, that anxiety, right? That heightened, panicky feeling that we can get. And it just begins to soothe and tame. And something that I like to do to add on to this technique, because we can do this every single day, no matter where we are. And I even suggest, say you're in the classroom, right? Or say you're at a job and you're in front of people, but you're feeling that start to rise. You could just very gently, very subtly tap on your lap. No one needs to see what you're doing. You could tap your feet, alternating. And so you can do it in really subtle ways that doesn't, cause a lot of attention. Or if you're, in a safe place and, maybe you're in a private place as well, you can tap wherever you want. You can get as crazy as you want. You could do it for 10 seconds. You could do it for 10 minutes, right? You can make it work for you. So what I add into it are things like I'm safe. I'm safe, right? I talked about that fear of being seen. So I sometimes get the pre-performance jitters before stepping on a stage or before delivering a keynote. So if I'm feeling that activation in my body, right? My body's it might be, threatening to stand on the stage, right? It's perceiving it as a threat, even though it's safe. They've asked me to be there. They're interested in what I have to say, but my system is feeling all sorts of other things. So I can just gently, I'm safe. I'm safe to be seen. I'm safe to take up space. I'm safe to be self-expressed. I'm safe to be myself. And you can just go on and on and on, right? You get to make it up as you go in ways that feel good for you. But always starting, for me, I find it very valuable and very helpful to start with, I am safe. And if that's all you want to say, I am safe, period. Just repeat that. I am safe. I am safe. I am safe. And it's pretty incredible, the feedback that I receive from this, the way I feel even now, just after demonstrating. There's a lightness that comes over my body. There's a softening. And it's your nervous system kind of exhaling, okay, right. It's not a threat. I am safe. And so that's a tool that I love, that I introduce to most of my, group facilitation or keynotes. And it's usually very well received. So I hope it's well received for those of you listening and watching as well.
I love that it's a tool that you can take anywhere, especially because I think the healing work can seem intimidating and it can also maybe be isolating at times. So this is a really great tool that people can walk away with. Thank you so much. I wanted to move on to Indigenous self-care. So I know that in a lot of the work that you do, you are considering the Indigenous framework. And I want to kind of ask you, how does this differ from the wellness culture that we see in mainstream media?
That's a great question. And yeah, I love that you brought it up because, as I've been on my own journey of reconnecting and, decolonizing, something that has become increasingly apparent is how far we've moved away from our body's natural rhythms and from our own intuition, what feels good for us. And I think in the mainstream wellness culture, we see a lot of information. We see a lot of information of like, you should be doing this, you shouldn't be doing that. You need to spend this amount of time. You need to be doing 5 things every morning and then 10 things every night. It becomes incredibly overwhelming. And no wonder we're feeling anxious. Like, we're just bombarded with so much information. And I'm not suggesting that each of those individual activities or practices aren't useful and valuable. I think actually they all are in different ways, but it actually may not be what is best or most aligned for you. And so I really empower and encourage all of my clients and everyone I get the opportunity to teach or to share with is trust yourself above all. It might be exploratory at first to discover what is best for you and to realistically fit these practices into your day to day, right? I don't think you need to dedicate a full hour every morning. I used to think that. And I think that's when I was buying into that mainstream culture that told me that if I'm not doing at least an hour of self-care in the morning, that, my day is going to be so chaotic and I'm going to be XYZ and I'm not going to be enough and I'm not this enough and that. And that isn't actually what I have capacity for right now. And there are some days where I'm not, starting my day with a practice, but I'm integrating practices throughout my days. Like, it could be a midday walk through the park or through a nature trail or just through, the neighborhood. It could be just taking a moment to be like, okay, like, I need to reset. Let's do some of that tapping. Sometimes it's journaling. Sometimes it is meditation or breath work. But I allow my body and my system to guide me day to day. Because sometimes, for example, if I'm anxious and I'm waking up feeling a little activated, one of the worst things that I could do for my system is to sit and meditate. In fact, one of the better things for me to do would be to get up and move, because there's something alive and active in my body and I'm feeling it. That's the anxiety. There's a lot of very active energy happening. So it's better if I move. It could be even me dancing to one of my favorite songs. Like, that can be healing, right? So it doesn't need to be rigid. And I think that's where the mainstream wellness culture is problematic at times, is because we're sold a certain way that it has to be done, and that there's like this rigid structure, when I actually think it needs to be more fluid and more intuitive, and giving us the opportunity to really listen to what our body and our system needs, because sometimes it might be nothing and it might just be like stillness. And so, yeah, meditation isn't always great for those of us who run a little anxious, or breath work doesn't work well for us if we're already feeling a little activated. It might actually make that activation a little more heightened. So I think it's really important to do you, to make it work for yourself. Start slow and low. Like, a couple minutes in the morning could be more effective for you than if you were to try to cram in an hour and put yourself into a state of unconscious chaos. So our Indigenous perspective on well-being and self-care and wellness is so intuitive, and mainstream is just like more rigid. It's marketed to us, right? The people are capitalizing on it, and I don't think that's the way our ancestors knew how to take care of ourselves. It's what feels good for you.
Thanks so much for sharing that. In your podcast, you mentioned the concept of two-eyed seeing. Could you expand on what that teaching means to you?
Yeah, when I first heard about two-eyed seeing, like saw that term somewhere and started to do a little research around it, I was really drawn to it because it made so much sense to me, given the fact that I began reconnecting to my community and my culture in my 30s. So there was like 3 decades of disconnection. And, I was raised very Western, and I, adapted and adopted a lot of those Western ideologies and ways of being. And so as I've begun my reconnection journey, and yeah, just challenged a lot of like the ways that I was taught and like the way it should be, what we're taught and told in the mainstream. This term two-eyed seeing really landed because I was using this terminology of like, I feel like I'm one foot in the modern and one foot in the medicine, meaning like one foot connected to culture and then one foot just, yeah, living in the mainstream society. And so two-eyed seeing draws upon that and gives us, I guess, a framework, you could call it, to be able to effectively walk in two worlds, or to know that like it's okay to walk in those two worlds, and that there's value that can come from us being able to see, from both sides, that they can coexist, and that we can, still honor where we come from and our cultures and our communities and our languages and our traditions and ceremony, but we can also, integrate that into our modern life. And that's the way I see it, is they don't need to be so separate. That I think actually, if more of us adopted a two-eyed seeing approach, Indigenous and non-Indigenous alike, we would see some really positive and profound shifts and changes in what's happening in the world. Because I think Indigenous ways of knowing and being, I mean, of course I'm biased, but there's just such love and care and compassion, and understanding of the interconnectedness and the relationality and the reciprocity of all living beings, of the natural world, of the human world, of just everything, the industrial world. So I think if we can adopt more of that perspective, yeah, it would be really fascinating to witness what changes for us individually, but then as a collective. So knowing that it's okay to have one foot in both worlds, and that, yeah, there's medicine that we can actually gain from both.
That is so powerful. Thank you so much. And the final question I have is, considering your work has so much to do with empowerment, I'm curious what your advice is to the next generation who are currently trying to shape their own voices.
That's a great question, as they've all been. But, I think about, yeah, I guess like a younger version of myself who felt very lost and didn't feel like I could speak up, or that my voice mattered or my story mattered. And I think the wisdom that I've gathered, even in just the past few years, and I'm in my 30s, so if you can learn this at a younger age, oh man, that would be like, what a gift, is to remind yourself that you do matter, and that there is going to be duality, meaning that there are going to be challenges. There are going to be moments where you are faced with that fear that you hold, that are going to be uncomfortable and are maybe going to make you feel like you need to like hide away, or to stop showing up, or to dim your truth, or whatever it might be. And I've been in all of those scenarios. And something deeper within me would always urge me to pick myself back up and to keep moving forward. And so I want it to be clear that it's not going to be without challenge and hardship, but actually there's so much medicine in those challenges. And that if you can persist and to continue to guide yourself forward, and you're not walking the journey alone. Like, we've all got our ancestors by our side, and we've all got, support from the spirit realm. I think that's a big part of why I've continued to move forward, even though I've faced some really, really challenging times, is that through all those hardships, you gather lessons, learning, and wisdom, and that becomes your medicine. And that medicine is needed, and your story is needed, because there are people out there who are going to need to know what you've gone through to get to where you are. And that's going to be the encouragement that they needed, right? So just remember that, like, your story, the story that you're weaving, and the experiences that you have, like, it's adding to a really, really beautiful journey that, yeah, it becomes medicine for not only yourself and not only your network, but also the ancestors. Like, they're cheering you on and encouraging you. So yeah, just keep moving forward, and know, like, the hardship is part of the journey, and that can be beautiful also.
Miigwech, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure to have you here with us today.
Miigwech, the pleasure's all mine, and thank you for inviting me and the thoughtfulness of all your questions.
Miigwech to all those who tuned in today. You can find more episodes of our DWF Live on our YouTube channel. Be sure to like and subscribe to stay connected with future DWF Lives.